So Victory was very badly damaged during the Battle of Trafalgar. And Nelson had 27 ships, and he managed to drive Victory right through the line. That was the biggest, most important battle probably in Navy history. Hello.
All right, guys, this is what I was talking about. Unbelievable.
My old friend Sean, my new friends Josh and Scott.
I know what I'm looking at. Tell these guys what they're looking at.
So this is a model of the HMS Victory, Her Majesty's ship, or at the time His Majesty's ship, Victory, which is the oldest, longest-serving ship still on active duty in the world.
Yeah, we're over the 250 mark, right?
That's right. So this ship was authorized in 1758, which was the same year that Lord Nelson was born. Isn't that interesting?
Right? No, I did not know.
2 years after the start of the French and Indian War, the 7-year war, they call it in England. And they laid the keel 1759 and launched it 1765. This is a 1:48 scale model. So 1 inch equals 4 feet.
Now, there was a statistic I read. I forgot how many trees did it take?
It took 6,000 trees.
And 90% were oak or something?
90% oak, yeah. And oak being the...
So I retained a couple of things here.
Yeah, that's right. So size-wise, the original ship, 186 feet in length, 52 feet wide, 25-foot draft, and then 205 feet tall, 2,500 ton ship. And with the guns,
you can't help but to think, okay, you were looking at the model, but what, Tony? Look at this. What are we looking at? Tell us.
So if you look at the ship model itself, you'll see all these gigantic blocks. They're called blocks. And so there's standing rigging, which holds all the masts in place so it doesn't move. So this holds in a couple of different dimensions, to keep tension as the ship's moving so that these masts go all the way to the keel. These are tree trunks, right? And with a tremendous amount of stress on them, with the wind blowing and the ship rocking and rolling. So these guys, they didn't have wire, it's all rope. And so they have these standing, they're standing rigged, and that would be one of the blocks. Like a dead-eye block, like that one.
Where would you think this one would be?
It'd be one of these.
What are these on
the big standing rigging? Yeah, just holding the
So I mean,
holding the big mast.
It's hard to put in perspective. Okay, we're looking at. I mean, this is a model, but it is a massive model.
Now, if you love all the content that you're seeing here, and you're like, I gotta get more, I wanna see behind the scenes.
Here we are, finally. We're in a undisclosed private location up somewhere in the mountains in California.
Well, head over to Patreon. That is where we're going to be showing first looks, behind the scenes, unboxing videos. Might even see some stuff for sale on there that you might not see anywhere else, and find us going to really cool places. So once again, head to Patreon. I'm Josh. This is Sean. Hope to see you there.
Take care, guys.
Oh, I can't wait to see that, Tony.
We have models from all different sizes, but here, I mean, this is the comparison that you just don't get to see every day. We actually have a part of the actual ship to know. I mean, you just can't put the size of this thing.
Yeah. It's a beautiful large. So it looks like a huge ship, right? 180 feet long, 186 and 52 feet wide. But if you can imagine, during the big battle at Trafalgar, there were 821 men on this ship. Can you imagine how tight they were packed into that ship? manpower intensive job to fire, the big cannons. So it was pretty tight quarters for them. A big, tall person, and I would have a hard time standing on the lower gun deck.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's some artifacts on here. Explain what this is. And then Tony can get a close-up of what's engraved on here.
So this is a piece of copper. They had to use copper plates because the ships back in the day, it's made of oak. And the Battle of Trafalgar was fought in 1805. The ship was launched in 1765. So you can figure out how old it was, 40-year-old wooden ship at the time of the big battle. So in order to preserve the ship from the tornado worms, they put copper plates, 3,500 of them, along sheathing the entire hull of Victory. These things, you can see the difference in scale. They were 4 feet long, 14 inches wide, all these copper pins. And then they use these giant copper bolts to fasten, the piece of the hull together, and up to 6 feet long.
Through the keel line, right?
Right, all the way through and you had to use copper because of the corrosion.
So, Tony, let's see, can you get a close-up of that? And this is actually one of the pins from the ship. I mean, that's, again, I love being able to...
It's a history you can hold.
Seriously. I mean...
So Victory was very badly damaged during the Battle of Trafalgar. And, Lord Nelson, Horatio Nelson, was killed during that battle. They also lost a pretty significant number of crew members that, lost or killed and wounded. But it was the decisive battle that ended Napoleon's ambition to invade England. So he had the largest land army, and he got together the Spanish and French fleet of 33 ships and said, hey, we're going to make a run on England. And Nelson had 27 ships, and he managed to drive Victory right through the line. Different than the normal, rules of battle at the time, where they came alongside and fired broadsides. He went right through the line.
Zigzag.
And basically they destroyed the opposing. So he was killed by a French sniper.
Wow.
In the crow's nest on an opposing ship. He shot
So-
to his.
It just so happens, I know a guy. The photographs of the time, here is a miniature portrait of Lord Nelson painted by a single hair brush. I mean, it's just kind of staggering. We'll get some more close-up B-roll of this, but I don't know if you ever saw that.
That's very cool.
And then
Very
I've
cool.
also got the Nemesis. Here's Napoleon. Same thing. And this is what people had during the day that could afford an image of these, call them rock stars of the day. I mean, this is what all people were talking about.
So Nelson, he was not an easy death. So he was wounded and took a long time to die. There's a famous painting of him in the arms of Captain Hardy, who's the captain of the ship. Nelson being the admiral of the fleet at the time. But they, I wouldn't work so well for me or Josh, but they put Nelson's body in a barrel of brandy to preserve him and get it back to England. And they interred him, I think, at Westminster Abbey.
Right.
Okay.
And then in London, you have Trafalgar Square. I mean,
Right, I've been giant, plinth with Nelson on top. So,
The dude-
so that was the naval battle. I'm a former Navy guy. That was the biggest, most important battle probably in Navy history.
right.
They trying to stop the entire, flow of that war between, France and England.
So how many guns is on this ship? I count 35 on one side.
They had 104 guns from the time of. And interestingly, about Victory and the other ships of the, this being a top-rate ship, the bigger guns are on the lower deck. So the 32-pounder cannons shooting a 32-pound cannonball. So there were 15 on each side, shooting out straight. Then the next deck up had the 24-pounders, and then the 12-pounders. The bigger the gun, the heavier the cannon, so the lower in the ship it had to be. And then they had the rest of them, a dozen on the quarterdeck. Then they had two great big 68-pounder carronades up on the quarterdeck. They launched these massive balls.
And those would lob these things,
Yeah.
over siege walls, ship to ship.
So the Brits had this tactic of when the ship would roll up, they would fire so the ball would go a little further. And then if they wanted to hold the enemy under the waterline, they were waiting for him to start rolling up. And then the ball goes skipping across the water and puncture just under the water. Right? So pretty cool stuff. They were so close at Trafalgar when he broke through the line that the reports were that he actually set fires on the French ship from the burning gunpowder coming out of the
Wow.
The
Imagine
amount
how
of
close
fire
they
coming
came.
out of those cannons.
Just imagine how close they were. Pretty impressive stuff.
So tell us a little bit about the different, shells. I know that they've shot grape shot was one, and then obviously balls. What else would they shoot out of these cannons in battle?
So the big balls were to cause damage to the hull and to the gun decks. But if you wanted to, I just read a story because knowing you guys are going to come over, they recovered one of the topsails from Victory. And it had been put away, and for whatever reason, in one of the messes there in England, and it had 90 cannonball holes in it, right? But if you wanted to take down a rigging, then they would have this bar shot. You would have two balls with a bar between them, and it would go out, start spinning, and it would take down. The Victory's masts were destroyed. It couldn't sail. They had to tow it back to England. It was a wreck after that battle. But they also had chain shot. But the big ones are the balls, and that's if you wanted to sink the ship, set her on fire, that sort of thing.
So they had,
But the grape shot were really more for dealing with the deck.
Yeah, personnel.
And the other.
Yeah.
So I know Sean is a big fan of blunderbusses and musketoons and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the smaller, more manageable things. You can't be carrying around a massive, 3-ton
cannon.
cannon.
So the guys would be shooting those from up on the tops here, shooting down on the deck. And so the Spanish and French fleet had a lot more men than the Brits. I think they had 30,000 total people there. If you can imagine that, 33 ships, approximately 1,000. And so it was a massive humanity on the deck. So that's where the grape shot would come in and shooting, the blunderbusses down from.
so you got the balls that are looking to poke holes in the enemy ships. Then you got the T shot or the chain shot for rigging,
It would take down the mast and the rigging and the sails.
and then grape shot for anti-personnel.
Yeah, that's right. And then they didn't when they did the boarding, Sean's holding a boarding pistol, it'd be cutlass and
Yeah, then it was down
blunderbuss.
to the small arms fire. And this was the smallest of the firearms that were kept on these.
And then they'll have swivel cannons.
They did, but they'd probably mostly up on top,
Right.
right? You'd want to clear the deck for action, so the big guns were, that's where the damage, you inflict the most damage from the big cannons.
And-
They had swivels, but they would probably be, shooting aft, where the big guns are aimed side to side, and they also had some kind of, but you have to be careful because you didn't have too many clear lines of fire.
And,
right?
and here's the thing. They would have cannons set up in certain spots as contingency plans. If they were boarded, I mean, you've read all these accounts.
Sure.
They would pack some of these swivel guns with just sand because they knew if they, raped or raked the deck with really lethal projectiles, you're damaging all sorts of things on the deck. But sand, you're stopping the guys and you're incapacitating them. And then the cleanup guys, the Marines, what have you, are gonna,
Yeah, they had a large number of Marines on them.
Yeah.
So in the Pirates of the Caribbean, there's one shot where they're stuffing spoons and forks and stuff. Is that real? Like, would there ever be situations where they ran out of ammo, and what kind of stuff would they?
That's a great question, and Sean and I we've debated this one before.
absolutely yes.
These were iron cannons on Victory, so you wouldn't want to damage your. First of all, you wouldn't want to put that into a big cannon. These are made to shoot the cannonballs, right?
Right.
The blunderbuss. There's all the story of people stuffing, broken piece of metal or coins. And Lord Jim. That great scene where they shoot the blunderbuss and the gold coins come shooting out. But you do that a couple of times, you ruin the gun.
Yeah.
So maybe as a last resort, if you ran out of projectiles, you could do that.
Again, we're assuming a lot. The person who's firing the weapon should know what the weapon is capable of doing, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, you're going to put the wrong thing in there. You're going to face the consequences of a catastrophic breach
They
explosion.
can blow up in your face.
Yeah. But I just, Yeah. So, needless to say, you can see why this will not fit on the tray today.
So, real quick, where would you say the powder magazine would be located on a ship like?
So there's a couple, but the drawings of the ship that I was looking at, they used to build these models and to restore Victory, which is still on display in Portsmouth, UK. Low and forward. They didn't want to have them to where you could easily be, caught on fire from an enemy shot. So they were low and fore and aft. And then they would move the powder out and have it. They actually had a lot of boys and just youngsters. They actually had women on Victory during that battle.
I was going to ask you at the time of Trafalgar, because a lot of times the families, I mean, and you can see this, especially on the Constitution, some of the cannon placements. This is where the extended family was living too. And you were like, what? Women? Children? What?
Son, that's where they had the son of a gun.
Exactly.
And he had
Exactly.
there.
All these expressions that come from this period. Wow. But was that the same way on the Victory?
So I guess as I read, it was up to the captain, and Captain Hardy did allow some women on board, so wives.
Okay.
And during the battle, they pitched in and acted as nurses and helped carrying wounded guys down to the ship's dock. They turned the orlop deck, which was down low, into the emergency operating room. These nice windowed rooms in the back with the captain, the admiral, the officers' quarters, and that sort of thing. Because they had nice light. They cleared those for action as well, but they also used those as a sick bay. They had a lot of wounded people after this battle.
And the young boys, literally. I mean, they're 13, 14.
Nelson was a boy when he joined.
Right.
Spent their whole life on ships.
The expression powder monkeys.
Yeah.
They were told to run and get powder from the powder stores to bring into the cannon crew.
Wow.
But here's also the other. You notice some of those powder magazine buckets that I have, and some of them have a hole in the bottom.
Yeah.
The hole is so that can also be used for sand. Here's kind of the gory part. You can imagine when action is taking place and the amount of blood on the decks, it becomes so slippery. It was essential for that sand to be always spread on the deck so people aren't falling. And these are the little minute things that are overlooked that, I don't think should be, because it's a part of the story. I mean, and then they also had fire buckets, the leather buckets that did the same thing. They had a stopper in the bottom. And have you ever seen one of those?
Oh, yeah.
They're leather. They didn't exist.
Well, they used the leather so that it wouldn't create a spark.
Right.
There was no metal in that bucket you're talking about.
Right. It's just, and talk about the big volley guns, the 7-barrel. And one of these days we'll feature one, but it was a carbine length flintlock that had 7 barrels, a cluster of 7. And it wasn't that you could select what barrel. All 7 barrels went off at the same time. And they thought that was great, but the amount of fire that would come out of the end of the barrel, there are accounts that it would catch the rigging and sails on fire. Not a good thing when
Yeah, I don't think it was adopted by the Royal Navy. I think Henry Knock introduced that. And they had a bunch of them. They're really cool collectible items today, but I'm not sure they went into service. They're a little too dangerous to fire those things.
Well, that, and to mention, they would dislocate your shoulder if you didn't shoulder it just right. Because that was 7 muskets going off at once.
Yeah. I just immediately start thinking about how hard it was to immediately be inundated with fog and smoke from all of these cannons firing once. How would you see anything? You'd have to just be going eyesight on the next guy's cannons going off.
And I can't overlook the fact and state that really it's about eyewitness accounts and the records, but the deaths caused by splinters is mind-numbing. And because you can imagine the impact of an enemy cannonball hitting all that wood in all different directions, those splinters of every different size and shape. And how do you treat that kind of infection? It's scarier. You think, you're going to be killed by a cannon.
You have to have a little courage to be able to.
You think?
Yeah, to do this. But you're right. You wouldn't have seen anything. They're so close together. When he broke through the line, so he broke through perpendicular to the French and Spanish line between 2 ships. one was getting further away, but the one was getting closer and closer. So as the cannons were going off, they were shooting right into that ship. And then, he got the rest of the English fleet to do the same thing, of course.
Yeah.
Destroy the superior fleet.
Oof.
Wow.
And setting fire to the ships, and they were actually sinking. It was kind of a crazy time.
And where did this battle take place geographically? Like, what part of the
Battle of Trafalgar?
So Trafalgar is off the southwest coast of Spain. So I guess the French and Spanish fleet was, hoping to take control of the English Channel and then start ferrying the whole French army over to invade England. So it's been tried before and it didn't work. Hitler tried it and it didn't necessarily work. And
have they found the wrecks of the Spanish and French ships in that area from that battle?
That I don't know. I can't answer that. I do know this. So HMS Victory, again, authorized during the height of the French and Indian War. And then by the time it got launched, they didn't need it because the war was over. It was launched in 1765. The war ended in 1763. So this wasn't commissioned until 1778, right at the height of what? Oh, that's right. American Revolution.
Great War.
But it was too big to serve off the coast of the U.S. because the draft was too deep. But the big debate on how to name HMS Victory, as I understand it, did you know there's a predecessor ship named Victory that sank in 1744?
Now, is there a connection to the Agamemnon?
God, I don't know, Sean, but the Victory, the previous HMS Victory went down with all hands, 1,100 men in a storm.
In the English Channel?
And they just found that wreck a few years ago. That one had bronze cannons, and they just started, there was a big court battle about who owns it, who owns the wreck, who owns all the pieces, but that was just discovered. As far as finding the French and Spanish ships, probably, they knew where that battle was fought. And it didn't happen instantly, so they were still moving and they were chasing down stragglers. This went on for a couple of days, the battle. So I assume that we're all scuba divers and such, so sure it would be fun to go.
Wouldn't be amazing.
And I know you have, before we move away from this, you have this amazing print of that scene of when Nelson, this is the scene when Nelson was shot. They're all around him. And I mean, we got to get a picture of this because this is the only way like this, we can talk about it and kind of paint a picture. But here's an illustration that we're going to show you of what took place on this deck, which is.
So that went right down there on the quarterdeck.
Okay.
And so a sniper on the French top, they had all their snipers shooting down, and they're all in that print. That's a seal engraving of a painting that I think hangs in Buckingham Palace.
Okay.
So I think that was made. The print was made in 1865 or something. And that painting was done right after the big battle, when they brought him home and realized the importance of what had happened.
Right.
Right. That he was kind of saved England from invasion. So that my print is hanging right outside the room.
Okay. I can't stress enough how cool it is and how it's the connective tissue that makes why we go on these little trips so worth it. Because I wouldn't expect Dave to bring this
Put it on your tray.
over to the house to put it on the tray.
It's heavy. Let me tell you.
Dave, is there any other historical kind of neat thing about this story that you want to share that maybe isn't really highlighted in the history books about this event?
That's actually probably one of the most documented naval battles in history. There are many, many books. I have a whole bunch of books on that battle and on the life of Nelson, as I probably shouldn't say this, but as a single man, he had a lady friend, a mistress, named Emma. And, he had a very interesting life. At the time of the battle, you may know all the statues of Nelson. He's missing a very important part of his body. His right arm is missing.
And how did that happen?
That was in battle. So he was in a bunch of the big, important battles in the late 1700s, early 1800s, throughout the Mediterranean area. The French and British fought year after year after year. So the 7-Year War that ended in 1765 was just one of many, many wars that stretched across. It was kind of a global conflict.
But you see depictions of him where he's got one sleeve and it's because no arm. And I mean, it's not like all of a sudden they just gave him this position. I mean, the guy worked his way up the ladder and obviously sacrificed in doing so.
Yeah, so just imagine this thing had 30 miles of rope on it. And it was 59,000 square feet of sail. Like more than an acre and a half of sail. And on a good day, they could push like 11 and a half knots. It wasn't a speed demon. But once it got going. For someone to be able to command one of these ships, they had to know every one of those sails and every line. They had to know that. And so these people spent their entire lives on these ships. That's something we can't even imagine today.
No.
In the time of automation, we just can't imagine the knowledge that it took to operate one of these ships and to be able to bring it in, maneuver it in close, steal the wind from the opposing ship and get in close enough to fire the gun, that sort of thing.
Well, as I'm just standing here, we've now kind of gone through the history of why this was made. I want to kind of focus on the dude who actually made this.
Yeah.
Because this is not, I can't stress to you, this is museum quality. 15, 20, 25,000 hours
Right.
to make something like this. I mean, now think about that. In today's day, here we are in 2025. Any artist that is qualified to make something like this with their hands, what is their hourly rate worth? What would you expect? Let's just say, for conversation's sake, $50, right? 50 times 20,000. You do the math. I mean,
so there's a good book on people who made a 1:48 scale model of HMS Victory.
That was going to be my next question.
As they estimated the hull, just to put the hull together, the way it was built, at the time when it was built at Chatham Shipyard, it was a 12,000-hour process. Now, I would imagine tools are probably better. That book was written shortly after World War II, and it was illustrated by G.F. Campbell, a naval architect. So it's got all the original drawings of Victory, and then all of his details for the ship modeler, and he estimated 12,000 hours to build the hull. If you can imagine.
Now that's just the hull.
The hull.
That's not from the deck up, which is the mast, the rigging. I mean,
the lifeboats. I mean, all the ship's boats. Everything just would have taken more time than anyone would be willing to invest today.
So case in point, I will always bounce off the survival rate of things like this. How many of these things still exist outside of a museum? The question is, I don't know the answer to that, but what I can tell you is that due to fire, theft, flood, I don't know how many of these things survive today. And I can tell you as time goes on, they're only going to decrease, not increase.
So we had a little earthquake here. Was it last week?
And
You got to shaking just a little bit. Yeah.
but something bigger,
No, we wouldn't like that too much.
no, none of us. So it just, I don't know. That's why we're kind of bringing these things to light to appreciate them while they are here and to hopefully inspire other people to, when they see something like this and you have the ability to protect it, own it, be a custodian, please do it. Because, I mean, I don't even want to ask how you got it here and how the fact that it's still in one piece is rather remarkable because I have not had the best of luck moving these things.
I've had it for 20 years. And when I bought it from a gentleman who had passed away up in Los Angeles, and I rented one of those high top vans, and I bought a bunch of mulch and created a cradle and drove it back here just on its own, just gravity. And then a friend and I picked it up and carried it in, set it up.
Oh, so lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, just hitting the brakes or whatever. And
Oh, I know. Exactly. I love it. I'm very happy to have it. People enjoy coming to look at it. So,
And, the other thing, I think you said this was built from the inside out. So everything is correct on the inside. If we were to actually be able to shrink ourselves and go inside of this, it would all be built Correct.
And you can shine light through the windows and the gun ports, and you can see the doors and the decks and all the details and the internal ladders.
Wow.
And that sort of thing. It's really cool. But they had more time available, I assume, back then. I wouldn't have the skill or the patience.
Is it possible that this may have been commissioned by the Admiralty just as a...
Scott, I don't know. The gentleman who owned it had passed away, and they were clearing out in the state. And I got a call from a friend who said, "Hey, if you can get up to LA this weekend with a van, I got something you might really like." And I said, "I'm on my way." And so it came home, and I've had it ever since.
It's beautiful.
I wish I knew more about where he got it from. There were no records that came with it, other than a couple of the pieces that he had collected in his lifetime. But that was 20 years ago when I got it.
Yeah, but there's something about serendipity here that, it ended up in the right place.
But I mean, when you combine the copper work, all of the rigging, the woodwork, as well as all of the, cloth work, this is a team of people that worked to do this. The glass, there's no way one individual did this.
You say that. There are guys out there that can do it all.
Yeah, but a couple hundred, if this was made back after Trafalgar, when that's what the world was talking about, was, oh my God, this incredible victory for England. And he saved the country. I don't know when it was made. So I don't know how you would be able to tell, actually.
Well, the thing is the quality speaks for itself. I don't know. I've got so many questions, but it's like we only have so much time.
The lamps are made of bronze and with glass. You can imagine.
We're going to roll over this.
The lit fires, the danger in that back in the day, if you can imagine.
Yeah.
Set the rigging on fire, some other terrible thing.
Are the little cannons actually metal?
They are.
Yeah.
They are. And so you'll also notice, this is a debate that I was reading about. You see the inside of the gun ports are painted red. And the inside of the walls, the walls of the gun decks, red ochre color. And so the story has always been, this is the Nelson color, the yellow and black checkerboard color from the exterior. He also simplified these ships so that it was much more elaborate prior to Trafalgar. He took this big old fancy bowsprit and the carvings of cherubs and little boys and that sort of thing, just made it much simpler, more utilitarian.
Right.
But the inside is painted red, and the urban legend all along was it was done so that it would preserve morale in the middle of battle, because there was so much slaughter inside the deck. There'd be pieces of your buddy, and if you had everything painted red, it wouldn't stand out quite as badly.
Yep.
And so there's that. But I've been reading that may or may not have been the case.
But it does make sense.
It does. But I wasn't there. I know that
I wouldn't want to have it painted white.
No.
So I think what I read is that actually at the time it was probably painted black, but red was the color that at least they believed in that during the Victorian time. So,
Right.
So just the concept of sailing a ship from England down, towards Spain and dealing with things like scurvy, running out of fresh water.
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the challenges that would cause crew members to die? Non-babble.
The nutrition wasn't good, and so there's all these stories about the hardtack. The ship biscuit being so hard that they could actually make carvings with it. You can find those. You antique guys can find full carvings made of the food. It was so hard. They have to soak it in warm water to bring it back to life. But they didn't have fresh veggies or fruit, fresh beef. They had salt beef, salt pork, and hardtack. They had a very simple diet. And then I guess the British came up and figured out in the 1760s and 70s that if you ate citrus fruit, limes, then that would prevent scurvy. So it was actually, I think it was James Cook who discovered, he was a very bright guy, and he was sent on all his voyages of discovery to the South Pacific. And if you wanted your crew to live long enough to make a voyage all the way around South America and out into the Pacific, and where he discovered the Hawaiian Islands, Australia, New Zealand.
That was the Endeavor.
Yeah, the Endeavor. that he came up with this whole notion of, hey, we got to have mines. The other thing was these guys didn't have the best hygiene. Have you ever heard of the poop deck concept? Yeah. Why don't you tell that audience what a poop deck is?
So
They didn't have a flushing toilet.
no, and it's the same thing with castles, because there'd be an overhang at the castle with basically a hole in it, and you did your business and it went outside of the castle walls. Well, early shipbuilding, up in the bow, you'd have sections where looking down, there'd be holes, and the guys would come out and do their business here, or they had them on the stern, but that's where the higher guys are.
Oh, that's right.
They had their own commodes, but most of it was.
There's an 821 men on this tiny ship, and so that was hygiene was a problem, and swimming was not a big sport back in the day, but Cook also showed them the benefit of bathing in salt water, and just to keep the body clean. So. Yeah, that was actually trend-setting, the whole notion of citric fruit.
Interesting.
So cool. Well, Dave, thank you so much for allowing us to.
Yeah, always a pleasure having people over to look at it. People that had shared the same interest that I have.
Phenomenal.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
You'll see this every day.
This is the history that's lost.
the thing is that sure, we could go to Stockholm and to the Naval Museum and find a big ship model, but they're not going to let us.
No, you won't look close. It'll be behind glass.
Yeah, you're not going to, they're not going to allow us with cameras to come in and get. So yeah, Tony, we'll have our work cut out for us.
History Roundtable, an all-new season. Don't forget to like and share your favorite episodes. And to learn more about the artifacts on the show, visit tortugatrading.com and commodorecoins.com. Till next time.